So welcome everyone. Thanks for choosing to spend your Wednesday evening with us. For those of you celebrating Thanksgiving tomorrow in the United States, happy early Thanksgiving. My name is Carter Dorst. I am the Executive Director of the Kensington Conservancy. If you're not familiar with the Kensington Conservancy, we are a nonprofit charitable land trust that aims to protect ecologically sensitive land in the St. Joseph Channel area. The St. Joseph Channel is about 20 minutes, 30 minutes east of Sault Ste. Marie. So when we say protect ecologically sensitive land, we look to acquire shoreline, wetlands, significant wildlife habitat, either by purchasing properties or by receiving donations, and then we turn those into nature preserves. In addition to doing that, we do some community stewardship projects like plantings along creeks, putting fences up to keep cattle out and stuff like that. And then we also try to do a lot of community education, especially for youth, about good stewardship practices. So I'd like to introduce you guys tonight to Karine Wilkerson and Tori O'Neill. Karine started as our land stewardship coordinator back in July, and Tori started as our program manager a couple of weeks ago in early November. So Karine, do you want to say hi to everyone?
Sure. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Good. Okay, just making sure I'm not on mute. Hi, everyone. I'm Karine, and I'm happy to be with you here tonight. What can I tell you about myself? Well, I'm excited to be working with the Kensington Conservancy. I live just about 20 minutes away down in Thessalon, if you know where that is. But originally, I'm from Alberta. But I've lived out this way for quite a few years, 14 years now, and I love it out here and I love the landscape, and I'm excited to be part of TKC and conserving the ecology in this area. So great to see you all here tonight.
Thanks, Karine. Tori, you want to say hi?
Hello, everybody. I'm Tori O'Neill. I'm the program manager at the Kensington Conservancy. I'm happy to be here tonight as well. This is my first TKC webinar. I won't be speaking much tonight, but as the program manager, I did want to say stay tuned for our upcoming events, and Carter and Karine have a wonderful presentation for you. I hope you all enjoy.
Thank you, Tori. So tonight we're here to talk to you about what you can do as a landowner. As I mentioned before, the Kensington Conservancy, we try to acquire land to turn into nature preserves. But we realized that not everyone is in a position to be able to sell or donate their property to an organization like us, but we still want you to do the best that you can do to make your property, a great habitat for wildlife and yourself. So one thing, there's quite a few links in this webinar. A lot of the good information we had to share is web pages. So we're going to send around a PDF to everyone who participated tonight of these slides so that you're able to actually then click on these links and not have to frantically write them down. So there's a lot of things that are good to do, but I just want to point out a few obvious things that you shouldn't do on your properties. I'm sure most of you know this, but it's not good to use pesticides. It's not good to go cut down all your trees. It's not good to, do lots of harmful development. Not good to dump oil into your creeks, that kind of obvious stuff. So I'm sure everyone's aware of things like that, what you shouldn't do, but we know there's a lot of people who are always asking what they can do to make things better than they already are. So do you want to go next slide, Karine?
Sure.
So there are a lot of things that somebody can do, way more than what we can discuss in just half hour, 45 minutes this evening. So these are just some highlights of some of our ideas. There's one thing that we thought of just before we started here tonight, of one thing we didn't talk about, which was, very popular, is not raking your leaves in the fall. So that's one example of the many things that we're not talking about tonight. The raking, if you're not familiar with not raking your leaves, a lot of insects will use the leaves in your yard to overwinter in, and then, so by raking them up, you're destroying that habitat, and they will naturally decompose and is good fertilizer for your yard as well. So what we will be talking about tonight are some native plant species that you can plant on your property, how to implement a managed forest plan and what that entails, and some information about the Conservation Land Tax Incentive Program. how to get involved in citizen science like iNaturalist and eBird, how to identify and control some invasive species, and then some tips and tricks when it comes to landowner stewardship. So I'm going to pass it over to Karine to start to talk about native plant species.
Hi, everyone. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the benefits of planting native plants around your home, your land, your camp, whatever you have. Big benefit of planting native plants is that they grow in the area naturally and they're not introduced by humans. They're uniquely adapted to the local environmental conditions, and they're not just an ornamental plant. They serve an ecological function. So they'll attract native pollinators and other wildlife. So here's a few examples of some very beautiful native plants that you could plant in your gardens around your property. The yellow one there, black-eyed Susan. We've got the purple wild lupins, bee balm, wild bergamot. The other thing with a lot of these plants is they are perennials. So once you plant them, they will come back every year and just proliferate on their own. They're very low maintenance overall. So there's hundreds of plant species that you could choose from various native plant nurseries that make great additions to your gardens. These that I'm showing you here are herbaceous plants, but there's also a variety of shrubs and trees. Some of the other plants you might consider are large-leaf aster, and of course milkweed, because you would attract the monarch butterflies to your property. In terms of trees and shrubs, there's serviceberry and tulip tree, dogwood, red and sugar maples, and low bush blueberry and elderberry as well. They have beautiful, delicious berries. So a very inexpensive way to have native plants on your property is to collect seeds and then save them for the next season. So the benefit of this is it supports the genetic diversity in the area, which in turn supports healthy biodiversity. Better genetic diversity gives the plants a better chance to adapt to the conditions in the local area, allowing for natural succession and ongoing growth in the landscape. So by harvesting local seeds, we know that we're getting plants that are well adapted to the areas and where they're going to be planted. So if you're going to collect seeds, if it's on your own property, well, you don't need permission. You can do that on your own. But if you were wanting specific seeds from a specific flower or something, you would have to get permission from that particular property owner to collect them. Another guideline for collecting seeds would be not to take any more than 20% of what you see in that area. You want to make sure you leave a lot of seeds behind so that natural succession of the plants can continue. And generally, we don't encourage you to take seeds from any rare species, just so that they can maintain their own natural colonies and not be disturbed in any way. So there's a really good resource here, which when you get the PDF file, you'll be able to click on it. It's from the Canadian Wildlife Federation. And there's a top 10 tips for collecting native seeds and kind of a how-to guide to help you out on that. And that picture there is showing a milkweed pod. So last year, I actually collected a whole bunch of milkweed pods, and I planted a bunch of the seeds into some little soil pots, and I was successful in actually growing a little bit of milkweed around my property because I did find scattering the seeds, they didn't always take, but well, if you put in a little more extra effort, they might they might actually establish. So here's a few native plant resources. Surprisingly, there's not a lot of local options for purchasing native plants. At least that's what I found in my experience. However, with the ongoing, there's become greater demand for native plants. So you never know, we do have a lot of local greenhouses. They may start stocking more native plants. So if you can't find them locally, there are a lot of online resources. One of the big ones is called the Ontario Native Plants Nursery, and that's on plants.ca. We actually were doing a project with the township and Tarbert Township, and that's where they ordered some native plants to do a planting program there. So there's a couple other resources there. Halton Master Gardeners, they've got kind of a master list of all the native plant nurseries that are in Ontario. So some of them you can order online, some of them you have to call them. So, but you can get a variety of different species through these various nurseries. And I think that's the last one for me. So I'm going to pass it back over to Carter to talk about managed forest plans.
Okay, so the Managed Forest Tax Incentive Program. This is when you create a 10-year managed forest plan. This is either a plan that you could create yourself or work with a local trained forester to do. Regardless, they must be approved by a managed forest plan approver, which is typically professional foresters are capable of doing this. So this 10-year plan, you can do it if you have forested property on your property that is at least 4 hectares, which is just under 10 acres. So if you have 10 acres worth of forest, you're likely eligible to do this plan. And the benefit, besides the ecological benefits of having a managed forest, is that you only pay 25% of your municipal tax rate. So if you have a pretty high tax bill, this can end up being a substantial amount of money that you save each year. There will be probably a slight cost for the plan approver to do that for you, but in the long run, over 10 years, you save a lot more money than it'll cost you. So what's included in this plan? It can be like basically not any kind of plan you want, but you can include many different things. It's not limited to specific things that you have to do, but these are some of the ideas. And even if you don't do a managed forest plan, these are all good ideas too. So you can plant trees to produce forest products or increase tree cover. So if you wanted to harvest trees, if you plant them yourself, that you're not taking away from any of the existing trees. You can monitor for insect and disease damage. This is something that's probably really important to do anyways. If your forest isn't healthy, then you know that and can take corrective action. If you can thin plantation or woodlots to encourage natural regeneration and growth of the remaining trees. If you're harvesting timber from your property, it's good to do it in a selective method that is not as disruptive as clear cutting or just randomly picking trees. And you can complete a more intensive inventory of what kind of trees are on your property. And one of the last ideas here is if you have sugar bush, is to thin the sugar bush to promote good development of tree crowns. So there's a lot more information about this program online at the link here. The Kensington Conservancy actually does have one managed forest plan on our Archibald homestead. So if you're interested in learning more, you can always talk to us about our experiences. Next, we have the Conservation Land Tax Incentive Program, commonly we refer to as CLTIP. So this recognizes, encourages, and supports the long-term private stewardship of Ontario's provincially important natural areas. So if you have a property that has something that's deemed provincially important, like provincially significant wetland, habitat for endangered species, or stuff like that, you can potentially apply to this program. For the most part, provincially significant wetlands are automatically applied, so you automatically receive this tax program. But if you believe that you have habitat that you're not automatically getting this incentive program for, you can apply to the MNRF to get it. Properties have to be 1/2 an acre in size, and the tax exemption is 100% tax exemption for the portion of land that's eligible. So let's say you have a 100-acre property and 40% of it is a provincially significant wetland, then you'd get a 40% tax reduction overall and only pay 60% of your taxes. So the more of the significant habitat that you have on your property, the more tax exemption you're going to get. We have these on most of our TKC properties. So again, we can help you out if you want to learn more about this. So citizen science programs, also commonly referred to as community science programs. These are, in my opinion, one of the best ways to learn about how to identify species and how to get a good understanding of what species are present on your property. If you have a good knowledge and appreciation for what's living on your property, you'll likely have more incentive to try to protect the habitat for these species. So the first one is iNaturalist. This is, you can either download an app on your smartphone or submit photos through the website online. But yeah, you take a picture of any living organism. It can be an insect, amphibian, mammal, bird, fish, plant, fungus, mushroom, anything that's alive. And then you upload it with the date you took the picture and where you saw it. And that creates a large database online that helps form range maps for these species. It helps determine when they're being seen, how many are being seen, population densities, all kinds of data that scientists, conservationists can then download to use for whatever projects they're working on. Plus, it has a really good recognition software. It's not perfect, but if you upload a photo and have no idea what it is, it'll at least give you a head start and know where to look. One thing that Kensington Conservancy uses iNaturalist for is to keep track of all the species on our properties. And we've also recently developed a program, we haven't advertised it too widely yet, where we're willing to work with private landowners or organizations to use iNaturalist to keep track of species on your own properties as well. So if that's something that you might be interested in, please reach out. The next one is eBird. Birding is one of the most, or probably one of the biggest natural hobbies in the world. So it's not surprising that eBird is the world's largest citizen science project. It's similar to iNaturalist, but only focus on birds. Instead of submitting photos, you can submit checklists of all the birds you saw during a specific time period of birding. So if you take a walk down the road, like a kilometer there and back, you count how many of each species you see and upload a list. So same kind of idea, it keeps track of range maps and all kinds of data that scientists can use. And it's really nice if you're interested in keeping track of how many species you've seen yourself, it'll do that all for you. Next one. So these are some other citizen science programs. EdMaps, which is the early detection and distribution mapping system for invasive species. Journey North, this is basically, for the most part, migration tracking. They track when monarchs, hummingbirds, robins, gray whales, when they all migrate. Plus they keep track of some other things like when leaf out is each year and the amount of sunlight each day and what time sunsets are. There's breeding bird atlases. So I'm pretty sure every single state and province in Canada and the US has conducted breeding bird atlases at some point. These take place over a 5-year period and are intensive surveys throughout the entire state or province that monitor or keep track of when and where birds are breeding. They take place every 20 years because they are intense, but at the end of the day, there's, the book for Ontario is probably about this thick from the last breeding bird atlas 20 years ago. And it's just full of incredible data about when and where birds are breeding across the province. So if your province or state is ever doing one of those, it's a great project to get involved with. Ontario's is actually happening right now, the third one. And then Bumblebee Watch. This is basically where you just submit your bumblebee sightings and that creates a database for bumblebees, which are declining rapidly. So it's very important. Okay, Karine's up again.
Or I had muted myself. I'm going to tell you about a couple of citizen science programs we have upcoming at the Kensington Conservancy. So the first one is a bat monitoring program. So we're currently seeking funding to purchase 5 ultrasonic bat audio recorders from a company called Wildlife Acoustics. And what we want to do is set up 5 of these recorders on 5 of the preserves to conduct long-term bat monitoring. And the reason why we want to do this is because there is very, very little information on bats in the area. It's a huge data gap in this area. So Carter was talking about iNaturalist. And if you look on iNaturalist for the Algoma district, there are only 10 observations of bats. So that's not very many. And so what we'd like to do is get a set of these recorders. And what they do is they can detect, they can identify different bat species using, I guess each bat emits like a different sound frequency. And so it records it, and then you have to have a special analysis software to identify each species. So it would be great for us to get just an idea of presence and absence of certain bat species here. So another aspect of this that that you could be involved with is looking for bat roost and reporting that to us. So we're going to set up some forms. So when you have a bat observation, you can submit that to us. So if you, even if you don't know what species it is, you could tell us that you saw a bat in which area. And the other thing is if you have like bats roosting in your siding or in your, on your barn or somewhere around on your property, you can see that there's a group of bats roosting there, then we'll have a form that you can fill out and submit that to us. So that's about the bat monitoring project. The other project we have upcoming is to do with water quality monitoring. So we have some funding through Lake Huron North to allow us to purchase 10 of these compact freshwater test kits, which are shown in the picture there. So this is a program to work with a group called the Water Rangers to develop testing protocols and training for water monitoring in our focal area. So the idea here is that the data will be collected by citizen scientists on Lake Huron and the tributaries located on TKC preserves. So places like Anderson Creek, the Deborah Creek, and Stovey Creek. And we're hoping to get both of these programs started this spring. And we're looking for people that might want to be involved. And again, this relates back to your properties. If you're interested in doing water quality monitoring or bat monitoring, these are 2 aspects of citizen science that, in case you might be interested in. So next, I'm going to pass you back up to Carter to talk about invasive species.
All right, so I'm sure most people are aware that of invasive species and kind of have a general idea for the threats that they impose. A lot of them outcompete our native species and create monoculture, especially the plants that don't allow any of our native species to thrive. And these invasive species often don't have much value for our local wildlife. So a few basic things you can do. First is prevent the spread. So if you're out on a public hiking trail, and then when you come home, probably a good idea to clean your shoes so that if you do get any invasive species seeds on your shoes, you're not attracting them to your own property. If you're going out in boats, fishing, that kind of thing, it's good to wash them afterwards so you're not spreading any invasive species from lake to lake, because that's how a lot of them do get into inland lakes that have no connection to any other water bodies. I'm not sure if the story is 100% true, but I think it's the basic idea, referring back to bats, is that white nose syndrome, which was brought to North America because someone went spelunking in a cave in Europe, got it on there where I think the bats in Europe are accustomed to it, brought it to North America, went in a cave here, and then spread it to our North American bats that weren't accustomed to white nose syndrome, which has, decimated populations all across North America now. So that's a big example of why, preventing the spread is a good idea. If you're able to remove invasive species, that's obviously good, because then that gets rid of them. It can be difficult. Some of them are tough to get rid of, all of them, and they spread rapidly, but each species is a little bit different on how best to remove them. But for plants, the general idea is that you pull them out when they're not seeding so that you're not spreading seeds anywhere, and disposing them in sealed plastic bags, letting them die 100%, and then disposing them. If you do see any invasive species, there's Ontario's Invading Species, has a hotline that you can call. There's also EDMAPs, which I mentioned before, plus you can also report them on iNaturalist. Now I'm just going to go over three or four invasive species that you might find in this area and a little bit about them. So the first one is purple loosestrife. It's a very pretty flower. I wish it wasn't invasive. I've seen them many times in wetlands and it really adds some nice color to the green. But unfortunately, purple loosestrife is known to take over and create these kind of monocultures that doesn't let anything else grow and thrive. So they're often found in waterways, roadsides, wetlands. They flower right in the middle of summer, basically. So you either have to catch them early or catch them after the fact. And their roots do go really deep. I have dug a few of them up and it is difficult. So sometimes you can even think you got it all not, and then they'll still be growing there, and you dispose of these in sealed plastic bags. Purple loosestrife is not as bad as it used to be. They released a beetle that feeds on purple loosestrife, and now they go in cycles. Purple loosestrife gets really bad, which allows the beetle to then eat lots, reproduce lots, and then there's a lot of them, and then they eat all the purple loosestrife, getting rid of it, but then the bug will die off and the purple loosestrife will come back up. It's just kind of a cycle, but this at least prevents them from taking over at least as much as they did before. Next, we have giant hogweed and wild parsnip. So both of these resemble Queen's Anne lace, also known as wild carrot, and cow parsnip. They are found along roadsides, ditches, streams, and agricultural land, so a lot of different habitats. They both have phototoxic sap that, when exposed to light, can cause severe burns on human skin. So not only are they invasive, but they're also really harmful for humans. It's probably not a good idea unless you really know what you're doing, to remove these because of their danger levels. But if you do some research and you know that you have a young plant, you can pull them up and get rid of them that way. Giant hogweed, I don't think there are any actual confirmed records in our local area, but they are in Ontario, so something that might happen someday. These ones are giant. They can grow to be over 10 feet tall. Cow parsnip does look really similar, and is abundant here. A lot of people misidentify it as giant hogweed, but to my knowledge, it's not here yet. The wild parsnip, which is more yellow color, can be quite abundant here in some places. I know the southern half of St. Joseph Island, I see lots of it there. But so don't touch it if you see it. And lastly, we have garlic mustard. This was brought to North America in the early 1800s to use as an edible herb, but it's now one of Ontario's most aggressive forest invaders. They displace native wildflowers like trilliums and trout lily, which also grow in forests. They hinder other plants by interfering with the growth of fungi that bring nutrients to the roots and plants. It's a fun fact we learned while putting this together. So right now, locally, garlic mustard is an issue in some city parks in Sault Ste. Marie. I have seen a few plants of it at Fort St. Joseph on St. Joseph Island, but for the most part, we have not seen it kind of out in the wild on TKC preserves and other areas away from major human disturbance. But in Southern Ontario, can be found throughout forests all over the place. So we're hoping that it doesn't get here, but someday it might. But if we're able to do corrective action before it's too late, hopefully we can prevent that. And I think that's back over to Karine now for some tips and tricks about landowner stewardship.
Yeah, so in making up this presentation, we came across this amazing guide from the MNR. It's called A Guide to Stewardship Planning for Natural Areas, and it's a way for a private landowner to develop their own stewardship plan for your property. And it's got a lot of great information in it, but I'm just going through just a couple of little points that I found in there that we haven't already touched on. So under this heading here, activities to protect and nurture the environment on your property would be to plant vegetation along watercourses to provide shade and reduce erosion. and conserve treed swamp areas. So a lot of people see treed swamps and they think, oh, you know, that's nothing, or look, there's some wood in there I might like, but you know what, it's really good idea to keep the wood there. And sometimes there's standing snags, which are really good for wildlife as well. So recommends not to harvest any wood from there. And another idea is to fence watercourses to prevent uncontrolled cattle access. So if you have a farm with cattle and you've got a little creek running through, or a pond or something like that, if cattle have uncontrolled access, they can really cause a lot of erosion to the stream, and it ends up becoming full of particulate and silt and things like that. So it's a really good idea to fence those off. So another few things we found in this guide here were some wildlife management activities. So plant trees and shrubs to link forested areas. So you might have a few different maybe pieces of forest on your property, and maybe an open area in between. It's a good idea to sort of connect those two areas with some planted trees and shrubs to allow for wildlife habitat, and allow wildlife to safely move through both of those areas. Another thing is to plant shrubs adjacent to the forest areas to create an edge. So if you think of a forest next to a clearing, you might have, you know, forest just ends and then you have a clearing. A nice like edge buffer creates really good wildlife habitat. So you might have some small shrubs there to provide some shelter and some protection from predators for wildlife species. And you could also maintain meadow habitat by mowing every 3 to 4 years. So if you do have a meadow, an old field, and you're letting it go fallow, rather than letting it, you know, succeed into a forest, you can maintain that habitat. It's really good for birds and different kinds of pollinators. There's all kinds of wildflowers that might grow in there. So it's good to maintain it by mowing it. You can also install nest boxes to provide habitat for cavity nesting animals. So things like eastern bluebirds and tree swallows, wood ducks. And of course, related to that would be to put up bat boxes as well. Another thing, if you're dealing with beaver issues with a beaver pond and a beaver dam on your property, you could install a beaver baffle to minimize flooding of the upland, but still maintain the beaver habitat. So a beaver baffle, essentially, it's something that you put inside the beaver dam that allows the water to flow out and prevents that backlog and flooding, but still maintains the dam intact for the beaver. Because if you destroy the dam, in all likelihood, the beaver is just going to come back and rebuild it. So if you leave it there, but you know, you're kind of controlling water, you're doing a favor to the beaver and to yourself. And then in forested areas, it's a good idea to create brush piles, retain cavity trees, protect raptor nests, and maintain conifer cover. So all of these things provide habitat for different kinds of wildlife, like similar to leaving the leaves on your ground, as the brush piles are going to create habitat for insect species and we're shelter for birds to hide in. And so all of these things are good to maintain and to keep in your property. Okay, so that's the end of the stewardship portion. Now, we did have a few questions that were posted ahead of time that I made a little slide, and I apologize for it being so wordy, but I wanted to try to answer the questions the best I could here. So this question says, what is the best method to stop raspberry plants from proliferating? And same for sumac. So raspberries are very prolific spreaders. They tend to have be in the woodland edges, and then they'll head towards the sun, and they send out all kinds of suckers, and they send out new canes, and it's the natural succession of the forest edge. It's kind of creating that shrubby space there, and they fill it in. So there's a few ways to try to control it, and that is to remove all the suckers that sprout. So you can try to dig down and really get down to those roots and try to dig them out. You can hoe or mow off all the new canes. So every year, once you cut it every year, you're going to have all the new growth coming out. So you could try mowing it down. And the best time to mow it down is actually when the plants are dormant, from November to March. So now would be a good time. All the leaves are off, and it's a little easier to access as well. You could try cutting the leaves, the plants down, and leave just a stump, cut out the stump, but then you have to detach that stump for every little single piece of root. Because if you leave anything attached, that root is still gonna, it's gonna find a way to establish itself again. The other thing to keep in mind is when cutting raspberry, to seal them in bags and throw them away. Try not to compost them or compost the branches and the stumps, because if you do, the roots could then get they can start growing again. So you might end up with raspberries in the spot where you've thrown them. So yeah, so you wanna just get rid of them entirely. So I put a couple of resources there to try to help you if you're looking to control your raspberries. While, you know, they do work, we don't recommend using any kind of herbicides. We recommend, you know, trying to keep on top of it with cutting and mowing. So related to that is the sumac. Sumac is another very prolific growing plant. It can really take over. So it's more of a woody plant, and what it does is it forms clones of itself, and it spreads by rhizomes in its underground root system. So again, another method for controlling this is mowing. So what's suggested is that you mow it twice throughout the season. So midsummer and then late summer. And the idea is that by cutting it twice, you're going to exhaust the root system, and with all hope, the clone will die, or at least be held back. It won't eradicate it, but it will maybe keep it from growing so quickly. The other thing you can try is to create a buffer zone. So if you've got sumac maybe spreading into where you might have a grassy area, you want to create a buffer zone so that it doesn't spread. So the suggestion here is to dig a trench and put like a plastic edger or metal edger in there. And that way it'll stop the movement of the roots, or at least slow it down. And then if you have any invading sumac, try to chop all around it and pull out the roots and chop all the roots up so that they can't establish. So again, a couple of resources I added there to try to help you if you're trying to control some sumac on your property. And hopefully these resources will help you a little bit. So the next question we had was, what can we do to support the ecosystem of our island's flora and fauna, and non-lethal treatment for destructive beavers? So I think with our presentation, we've kind of given some ideas on how you can support your ecosystem and support the wildlife habitat on your property. And I hope that you've gotten some ideas, and I hope we've covered that enough for you. Of course, if you have any more questions or anything about that, please do reach out to us. But I'm going to move on to talk about the beavers. So when looking this up, one of the main things for beavers was to try to make your property uninviting for them. So there's certain trees and vegetation that beavers don't like. Elderberry, ninebark, and twinberry are shrubs that they don't really have a knack for, I guess. And one thing you can do if they're really getting into your trees at your shoreline, you can put wire fencing around them. So you could use galvanized welded wire fencing, hardware cloth, or chicken wire. You could try painting the tree trunks with a sand and paint mix and to protect them from damage. Or you can try, if you have a larger area that the beavers are getting into, you could try putting in fencing over the whole area. But you really have to make sure the bottom of the fence is secure and flush to the ground. Otherwise, the beaver will just get underneath it. And then, of course, you can always try to protect the area with an electric fence. So that kind of covers beavers, getting into your trees and things like that. Now, some people are dealing with beaver dams, and we touched on that a little bit earlier. Destroying a dam should only be considered if all other techniques have been tried. If you have to remove a dam, you have to use extreme caution because you could cause downstream flooding. And that could damage natural habitats that are downstream and could cause property damage to, somebody else that might live down there. You have to be very, very careful about doing something like that. You also should probably check with fisheries and oceans to make sure you're not going to be causing any harm to fish or fish habitat. And you could be held liable for property damage that occurs downstream. So just got to be really careful with removing beaver dams, and we talked about installing a beaver baffle if that's an option there. And as a very, very last resort would be lethal action against beavers. So farmers are legally allowed to kill or trap beavers if they're damaging their farm property. If you are not a farmer, you can hire an agent like a trapper to come and act on your behalf for the beavers. So again, and if you're using any kind of firearms, follow regulations and bylaws and things like that. So I did include a couple of resources there, actually 3 resources. One from the Ontario government about preventing conflicts with beavers. One from our local, my local municipality of Huron Shores, a few more beaver control tips. And actually the Central Algoma Freshwater Coalition put out a little to do how to live with beavers information guide as well, which is the very bottom link. I'm just looking at it right now, realizing it doesn't really say what it is, but that's what that last one is. And let's see, we have another question. So this one was availability of various incentives for green projects on private property, such as taxes, hydro, freshwater, waste management. So Carter talked about the Managed Forest Tax Incentive Program and the Conservation Land Tax Incentive Program. So we'll get into that again. But the only other thing I could find in terms of incentive programs is this new program that came out from the federal government that's to make energy efficient retrofits. So there's a grant to get basically an evaluation. So you get somebody comes in and gives you advice on what kind of things you could do in your home to make it more energy efficient. And then you can get a grant of up to $5,000 to help you make the retrofits. So government programs are kind of always changing, always ongoing, depending on who's leading at the moment. So, we'll keep our eye out if we see anything else that comes along down the pipes, and we'll always keep you informed if there's something else that comes along, or if anyone else knows about something. These are the only incentive programs I could find at the moment. The Ontario government programs, there was a green investment fund, but it looks like that was from a few years back and it's since been discontinued. So again, we'll keep you posted on that if we find anything else. A couple other questions that came up that I didn't get a chance to make a slide about. This came in a little later. This one was, what are the best plants to plant around my camp? So we talked a little bit earlier about native plant species. So number one, that's what I would recommend, is definitely planting native plants, but it would depend on what you want to do or attract in terms of specific plants. So if you want to try to attract birds, you might want to think about planting service berries, or if you want to attract pollinators, you might want to plant flowering shrubs, or if you're just looking for something to add some color and look pretty, you might just want to pick some nice showy native plants, and again, they'll still have the benefits of being attracting pollinators and wildlife to the area as well. One other question, this is the last one, is what evaluation services or tools are available for assessing a property's ecology, fragility, low impact use, etc. So this relates back to that stewardship guide that I talked about from the MNR. If this is something you're interested in, I would highly recommend looking through that stewardship guide and developing a stewardship plan for your property. And if you had specific questions about your property, we're always glad to help out and to help you with that, whether it be about the ecology or species, or helping you use iNaturalist, things like that. So the other option is to, if you wanted to find and pay for expert advice, there are, environmental consultants that do that type of work. I personally am not familiar with anyone in the local area, and that's just because I tried to do quick research and didn't find anything, but there may be people around that will do that. But yeah, so if you want to know more about that, feel free to reach out to us. And I think that's all I have, Carter.
Great, thanks, Karine. So we'll go to the next slide here, which is our contact information. So as we said many times throughout this presentation, do not hesitate to reach out to us if you have any follow-up questions, you have something that you thought of that we didn't address tonight that you want to ask us. Feel free to message any one of us at any time, and we'll try our best to help you. So we just now want to open it up to the floor to see if anyone has any questions right now. So if you do, feel free to turn your video on, unmute yourself, and ask away.
Hi all, thanks. This has been great. We don't have a lot of, we're on a tiny island, and we certainly don't have a forest, but it's good stuff that you've given us here. Thank you.
Thanks for coming tonight. Glad you appreciated it.
I want to echo what Steve just said and Gail said. I'm mostly on a tiny island, although I'm expanding on the shore, and I think your board chair both knows about that and has some role in. So this has been really helpful, and I'm really delighted that I could pose my question about incentives, and you answered it so well. And I'm going to go back to this recording often because of all the useful stuff. And forgive me for getting a little personal. Congratulations to all of you. I think this webinar series is great. And I'm going to just take a moment. For those of you that get on YouTube, I just subscribed to TKC's YouTube channel. It is phenomenal. It is so pleasant to scroll through that and see the stuff that they're posting. And so thank you, and happy US Thanksgiving to everybody.
Thank you, David. Glad you appreciate it. We're sorry we didn't have more incentive programs to share, but we found lots that were discontinued, which was unfortunate to see, but we're hopeful that in the future, there'll be more for us to share. Just one message from the chat. There is apparently a Northern Ontario supplier of native plant seeds called Northern Wildflowers, and they're near Sudbury. So if you're looking for a somewhat local source of seeds, check them out. Thanks for that, Maggie. Any other questions, comments?
Could you add that link to the PDF before you send it out?
Great idea.
Sure, we'll do that.
To the Northern, to the supplier there. That's great. Thank you very much.
Okay, will do. Thank you. All right, well, if there's no other questions, we'll wish everyone a good night and thanks for coming again. We'll probably be taking next month off just because of the holiday season, but we'll almost certainly be back in January and then continue webinars throughout the spring, maybe into early summer again before taking a summer break. So thanks again, and we'll see everyone soon. Again, happy Thanksgiving to those celebrating, and happy early holiday season. Have a good night.
Thank you all. You too. See you next summer.
Thanks, everyone. Good night.
Everyone.